Hello and welcome back to another episode of Out of the Fishbowl, an exploration into how things are and how they might possibly be. I'm your host, BrettFish, and this particular aspect is going to be around different ideas and concepts of truth in an episode that I've titled
Episode 3, You Can Handle the Truth.
A quote that I found on the internet goes like this: "The truth is still the truth, even if no one believes it. A lie is still a lie, even if everyone believes it." And so that brings us to the starting point of this particular episode and the question, what is the truth? And in a world that's embraced fake news and feeling-based information, if I feel it, it must be true, it can often be difficult to know who and what to believe. And I remember the day that I stopped believing the newspaper. Now, I grew up in a world where if it was in the news, if it was in a newspaper, if it was in a history book, even if it was in an advert, it was the truth. I grew up believing that 4 out of those 5 dentists really actually use that toothpaste. It's on TV. It must be true. And that's kind of the sense as a young kid growing up that I had. And somewhere along the way, I learned about the political and social and even economic agendas and biases and context, and I guess the lenses that we view things through. But it all started with an accident involving some fireworks. And so there was a guy at my dad's church whose brother used to do firework displays. And this was, 20, 30 years ago, a long, long time ago. And I remember that my parents told me about this accident that had happened. Shortly after it happened, they were busy doing a show for a school, and the box of fireworks turned over on its side, and he ran forward to try and sort it out and to avoid it creating even more of an incident or an accident or whatever. And he got badly burnt in the incident that followed. And I remember hearing the story from my parents, and a couple of days later I was in my favorite coffee shop reading the newspaper, as I did in those days, although if I'm honest it was probably just paging to the comics page. And I remember seeing an article on this fireworks accident, and it was just a short kind of half article almost. And in a couple of 100 words, I just remember them getting so many of the facts completely wrong. I knew the story, I had a good version of the story, and this article, it felt like somebody had been given the heading, firework accident, and been told to make up an article. It was that wrong. It was like I was reading this thing in the newspaper, and just there was this moment of disconnect. It's like, but what's going on here? It's in the newspaper. It must be true. But everything in me knew that it wasn't true. And so that was kind of my first encounter with this idea that not everything in the newspaper is true. Not everything in the news is true is something I'd find out a bit later. Not everything in adverts is true. Feels like quite an easy one to discover. And then even later, not everything we read about in the history books is true. And again, I was schooled in apartheid school, and so we had history with a very strong bias one way. But for me at the time, going through that education, this is true because it's in the history books. And so there was no sense that people writing the history books would have an agenda or would be trying to tell one side of the story. It's in the history books. Obviously, it's true. And so this idea that when truth is reported, when stories are reported, there is always an angle, there's always a bias, there's always a point to the story, there's always a lens you're seeing it through. It is very difficult and maybe impossible for anyone to really accurately present the truth of a situation. You think of 3 different people observing a car accident, and they will all tell it truthfully in terms of what they remember and what they've seen, and yet you'll get 3 different encounters. And maybe because you've got 3 of them, you'll be able to piece together what really happened. But there's probably some untruth or some misperception in each story. Another discovery I had quite recently, like a couple of weeks ago, I was visiting a friend in hospital, and I recounted something that he told me about his sister years ago. And this is a story that I've told a number of people during that time. And as I was telling him the story, he said to me, that's not true. That's not what happened. I don't know where you came up with this. And that blew me away, because it was a moment for me to realize, because there was no sense of my memory of the story that I was telling would be more accurate than what he was saying, because it was his lived experience, and he obviously knew the truth of it. And in a moment I was like, wow, I can't even trust my own memory. My memory absolutely believed and was convinced of the story that I'd been telling. And I found out in a moment that I'd got it wrong, something that I clearly remember. And if we can't trust our memories, that becomes a very scary thing. And it's the danger of a single story. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie speaks about it in her TED Talk. The danger of a single story is you get one perception, you get one idea, you get one ideology, one recounting of events. And so it's always important to get as much information about things as we can to ascertain what is the truth, or what is as close to the truth as we can figure out. And so the next question on this that interests and challenges me is this: where are the safe and honest places to discuss important things like race or politics or religion or sexuality, things that really seem to get people angry and really committed and really loud and personal? Where do we find safe spaces to explain, to wrestle with, to grasp, to discuss things that we are trying to figure out the truth of, things that matter, things that are relevant to life and to the world and how the world operates? And when I thought about this, when I think about this, I think, as with many things, that there are the extremes. No matter which way you go, if you head into extreme territory, then there is a danger. And so where are the safe and honest spaces to discuss? The one danger is the danger of the bubble. If you are only discussing important issues with people that look like you, that think like you, that have had similar life experiences, then there's a danger that story is simply going to affirm what you already know. It's not going to take you to new places. It's not going to give you new perspectives. It's not likely to challenge your thinking. If you are in a bubble of thought of people that have similar life experience, chances are that they will just reaffirm whatever you think, or whatever you think you already know. And then the other extreme is what I'd say the dangers of social media public spaces. And so when I'm trying to go deep into religion or politics, putting it as a status on Facebook when my settings are set to the most public of settings possible, so anybody in the world can come and hang out on my Facebook status. And you can obviously change that. You can set the settings to what you want them to be. But because I'm interested in discourse and engagement and learning and growth, mine are set to the most public. And so that tends to not be the safest space to discuss some of these igniting issues, let's call it that: race, politics, religion, sexuality. Because people will come along that aren't committed to the conversation, that aren't willing to engage. Anybody can see the status and jump on and commit to it for 5 seconds and give their opinion, or drop an insult, or drop a meme or whatever, and then disappear. And so you're not only inviting an audience that really care about this thing, that are serious about grappling with it, about wrestling with it, about discovering truth, but you invite anyone's opinion. And so status spaces, Twitter, or Twitterer as I call it, spaces, are not necessarily going to be the safest and most honest spaces to discuss things. And I think one space that I've found, it's not perfect, but one space that I've found to be pretty good is something like a Facebook group. And so one of the Facebook groups where I've learned a lot and been challenged a lot, especially around issues of race, is called This Dialogue Thing. on Facebook. And so there's some sense of covenant or commitment when you enter the group. You have to ask to be allowed into the group. You might have to answer 2 or 3 questions, just trying to assess whether you are committed to this conversation. But people that are part of this group, this dialogue thing, are there because they are wanting to discuss race, to learn what it means to be a white person or a black person or another person of color in South Africa, or to navigate issues that are difficult or controversial or painful in that specific area. And so you're not going to get random people popping in and dropping comments. People that are in that group have committed to that space. They've signed some kind of covenant to say this is the engagement we are choosing to operate in. And I was involved in another group a few years ago called Conversations for a Just South Africa, which was a similar type of thing with maybe a bit of a broader base than just race. But there was the sense that when people joined, they committed to not being trolls, to not just getting personal about things. They committed to listening, to doing research, to being respectful about the conversation. And it didn't mean that we didn't have heated conversations in the group. It didn't mean that it sometimes got very, very aggro, very loud, very shouty. But what it meant was that because people had committed to that space around a particular topic, that you were more likely to be on point with how that conversation would go. And different groups will have different extremes of how challenging they want to be. I'm part of another race group where it's all about just sharing information. And so there's not a lot of invitation to dialogue and engage or whatever. But if you've got a good article or if you've got a video that you've seen that's really helped you and challenged you, it's a space for sharing information with other people that they can learn from and check out and do what they want to do with. And so it doesn't have to be overly defined. But I think that Facebook groups are an example of a space where we can invite dialogue that's going to be a little bit more honest and real and safe. And whoever sets up the group can set up kind of the safety of the group. And those, like trying to manage those spaces, are often really challenging and difficult because people are challenging and difficult. Another thing, just as I'm thinking about this, is book groups, book reading groups. And I've got some friends that will tackle some really challenging books and invite 6 to 8 people to journey with them. And then they read a chapter and meet together every week to have conversation about that. And those are spaces that you can set up as diverse spaces with diverse thought, where you have rules of engagement, where you're not going to insult people, where you are going to listen to what people have to say, where you're going to be respectful. And those can still get loud and, in a sense, a bit out of control and a bit aggro because you can deal with really important topics. But there's a sense of being able to curate them for a little bit. Or to some extent of being able to keep them on track, I guess. And so taking that idea that I mentioned earlier, this idea of the danger of extremes, I think that one place where we see that the most is, again, on social media. I've seen it on the Twitter when it comes to this whole Republican versus Democrat thing in America, that at the extremes, whether you are a Republican or whether you are a Democrat, your response online in those spaces is believe what I believe or die. And that might sound pretty hectic, but I've seen that multiple times. People wishing the worst of just disgusting, dehumanizing stuff on people simply because they belong to the other party. And so it's the sense of all or nothing. You either believe everything that I believe, or you are an idiot, you're a moron, you're the scum of the earth, you just don't get it like I do. And the danger, or those extremes, are very dangerous spaces because they tend to encourage on both sides, on all sides, people that are not respectful, people that are not willing to learn, people that just cling so tightly onto their belief and aren't willing to have a belief challenged or informed or grown. And I think another kind of idea that goes alongside that one is this idea that any belief that you accept out of threat or coercion, you are likely to let go of easily. I think of being born as a child or growing up as a child. Your parents might force you to follow a certain religion or force you to have certain rules, like we don't watch TV in our house, or we don't eat that kind of food, whatever it is. And if something is authoritarian, if something is put on you out of threat or coercion, there's a huge chance that when you have freedom, so maybe when you're 18, when you leave the house, whatever it is, you will go and do that thing anyway. You might be more encouraged or more tempted to do that thing because it was always told to you as something you couldn't do and shouldn't do. And so a belief that comes out of threat or coercion, you are likely to let go of easily. Whereas a belief that you are invited to, that you explore yourself and arrive at after some level of kind of work, you've wrestled with it, you've really done some research, you've really fought for it, those kind of beliefs you will tend to hold for longer, and I think they'll tend to have much more gravity or trust. And another aspect of this all or nothing is that it doesn't really leave any space for complexity or nuance, which most things have. And maybe a silly or ridiculous way of looking at that a little bit further is something that I call the chocolate paradox. Anyone that knows me knows that I love chocolate. I'm the sugar king. I love all things sweet. And so I might make a statement that says, I love chocolate. And that might seem true. It might feel true to me because I really, really love chocolate. And I'm the biggest fan of chocolate in many ways. And you might come to me and offer me a chocolate that has raisins in. And then suddenly things get a little bit more complicated, because if you know me, you will know that almost as passionately, maybe more passionately than I love chocolate, I hate raisins. And I could go into that on a whole episode of the evil of raisins. But suddenly this idea that I love chocolate has a bit of a caveat. I love chocolate unless it has raisins in, or maybe sultanas or other fruit. There might be some middle ground of, you might come and offer me a piece of chocolate that's been licked by a llama, as happens regularly, right? In Napoleon Dynamite related movies or incidents. And if you offered me a piece of chocolate that had been licked by a wild animal, then I might have to think a little bit more about how much I love chocolate. And so the danger of an extreme statement of, I love chocolate, that's the end, without being prepared to say there are some cases where my absolute belief might not be true. There are some things that shift that belief. There's some extra information that will cause me to think a little bit harder. I love chocolate. I'm not particularly fond of white chocolate, and I really will not eat chocolate that has fruit in. And so it is a silly example in some ways, but this idea that an extreme view doesn't leave space for, what if this happens? Or what about this? Or have you ever thought about this? Or some new information comes in. And we've got to be able to hold our beliefs loosely in the sense of having this understanding and this idea that an idea I have should be able to be challenged. If the idea is true, it will survive the challenge. I might even believe in the idea more strongly, but unless I'm willing for the ideas of things I hold on to be challenged, and for the possibility of them to be proved untrue or incorrect or slightly wrong, or that there might be alternatives that I've never heard of or thought about, then there's a danger that they're not true. They're just dogmatic ideas, and they're just tradition of what I'm holding on to. And so the encouragement is to hold ideas firmly, in a sense, like work on the things you believe, do research, try and understand, have conversations with people that think differently. And so in doing that, you strengthen your beliefs. But you should always approach them with a sense of what if enough proof came up that proved that this belief was wrong? Would I let go of it? Would I turn elsewhere? And if you are so adamant and dogmatic about things you believe that they can't be proven false, then you might find that you're not being honest when looking at proof or alternatives or different stories or different perspectives. And that can be very dangerous. There's another place, and I'm not going to speak about this too much, but this idea of you're in a deadlock argument with someone and you come to the point of agreeing to disagree. Now, I'm wondering, as I thought about this idea, I was wondering, is that just a way of checking out? Like refusing to engage in a conversation because we're scared of conflict sometimes? But also, is it possibly that we're scared of ending up in a place where we don't know or we're not sure about something? And that seems to terrify us. Why is it so terrifying that there might be a space where we don't know the answer, where we're not sure, where maybe we think this, but we don't know. we think it quite strongly, but we don't really know. And I think the idea of being in those spaces seems to really frighten a lot of people. I think it frightens me sometimes. I want to know, I want to be sure, I want to believe. And the older I get, the more I lean into that space of not knowing or not being sure, just because I realize that things are complicated, that things are nuanced, that when you take different perspectives into account, there's this intersectionality. So things never operate along one plane. There might be a race aspect, there might be a gender aspect, there might be a money aspect that are all feeding into this thing at the same time. And if you're looking at something purely from a race point of view, you might be missing where money is having an effect. You might be missing where present context is having an effect. And so this idea that ideas that we hold on to, we need to be able to look at them from all sorts of kind of ways and perspectives. And what do we lose when we invite people to sit in or lean in or spend some time in that space of not knowing or not being sure? Like how important is it that people definitely, absolutely know the things they know, or desperately believe the things they believe? And what do we lose when we allow people to just be in a space of not knowing and not being sure? And so instead of kind of ending an argument on this, let's agree to disagree, which often seems to be checking out, just to be, we can't get anywhere, let's stop. Like, what if there's a sense of, I don't know. You've made some really good points, and you're starting to challenge some of the things I think. Let me check those out. Let me bounce those off other people that believe the stuff I believe and see if they have better answers than I do. Let me go do some research. Let me hear from somebody who has a completely different perspective. And let me hold my belief under a microscope, and let me see where maybe it needs to change or be adapted or be improved, or maybe it just needs to be held on to more strongly. And so embracing this not knowing or not being sure it's not the worst thing. It's not like the end of the world to be sitting in that space of not being absolutely convinced about something. We live in a changing world, and things that were true 10 years ago just aren't true today. If you take technology as an example, things that were impossible are now very possible. And 10 years from now, it's going to have moved to an even different state. And so if the world is changing, then the way we look at the world and the way we relate to the world, in some ways will need to change, and in other ways can probably still stay the same. I want to finish off with looking at a practical idea that is something that I've experienced, and it was a lot easier in pre-COVID times, so this isn't something we've done for a long time, but this was a way, kind of a safe space we found to dig into these questions of what is the truth? How do we get a little bit closer to the truth? And it was something that we used to call deep dive dinners. And the idea of a deep dive dinner, often if you're hanging out with friends and a topic like race or religion comes up, you might sit and chat about it for 10 minutes or maybe if you're really serious, 30 minutes, but it's not a lot of time. And so it tends to be quite surface or get quite aggro quite quickly or whatever. And so we looked at creating spaces around a dinner, so this idea of breaking bread together, where we would deep dive on a topic. And so we'd invite 8 friends, and if we were discussing something like race, we'd make sure it was a diverse crowd, that wasn't 8 white people sitting around a table. If we were discussing money, we'd make sure there was a range of people that were earning a lot and people that weren't earning much, and somebody who's unemployed. And if it was on relationships, you might have someone that's dating and someone that's single, and an engaged couple or a married couple. And so you try and get a diversity of people, diversity of age, diversity of belief, diversity of experience, sitting around a table and sharing a meal together, which is quite an intimate thing. It's quite a safe space creating thing. Let's break bread together. Let's eat together. That feels like something that invites people closer together. And we would spend 4 to 6 hours, and sometimes longer, on a topic that people knew about before they came to the dinner. So there was that sense of commitment or covenant. I'm going to give you 6 hours on Friday for this conversation. I'm going to commit myself to that time. And so part of what we did was just creating a safe space and realizing that safe space doesn't mean comfortable space by any means. It doesn't mean a non-disagreeable space at all. We had people physically shaking in anger as they responded to other people's opinions or or comments or whatever. But this idea of a safe space, a place where you can talk and be honest and be real, and you are not going to be ridiculed. You are not going to be dehumanized for holding that opinion, even if we disagree with you. And the purpose of the evening wasn't that after 6 hours everybody leaves thinking what I think about the topic. There was no agenda of I'm trying to move people to this thought or opinion. It was, let's create a space where people can engage, and hopefully when they leave they have something to think about this more deeply, to wrestle with it some more. Hopefully there's some new relationships that are being created, and those turned out to be so incredible. Like every single one we had, they were often a little bit awkward at the beginning. It was often hard to get everyone together, but once you got people into a room, I just met someone a few months ago when I went up to Joburg for training, and he was like, I was at one of those dinners you did 4 years ago, and we reconnected, and just hearing about how that time had affected his thinking. And he was someone that stepped into that space not amped for it. And he showed us that physically when he came in. He was like, convince me this is a good idea, I don't want to be here. And years later he's still talking about what went down there. And so this is not all the ideas, this is just one practical way that we can find or make spaces that work in terms of us being able to dive deeply into truth, to be able to try and get a different idea of truth. And I think another helpful thing to mention is to get a number of sources of information. So don't get all your information from one specific news place, don't get it from one specific platform, but try get a range of things and ideas about topics so that you can balance them off against each other, so that you don't get pulled into the bias or agenda of one group of people or one kind of area. And so try when it's a topic that's important and something you really want to understand, to hear from a range of people. And then hopefully through that you can get a better understanding of some semblance of truth, or what is more likely the truth in a situation. I want to finish off with another quote, and there's two of them. It's the same quote written in two different ways. The one I found on the internet that says, better to be slapped with the truth than kissed with a lie. I really like that. Better to be slapped with the truth than kissed with a lie. But it seems to be a riff on one of my favorite proverbs from the Old Testament of the Bible, which goes like this: wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. And so the question is, like, when you've got enemies around you, people that don't really care for you or look out for you in a way that is genuine, people might just be wanting to keep you happy, they might not be wanting to not rock the boat or not disappoint you or something like that. But a true friend, when that relationship is assured, when there's that sense of this person loves me, I can trust them, then when that bond is there, then they can even wound you in a sense by telling you a truth that is painful, that is uncomfortable, that requires you to change. And so a wound from a friend can be trusted. But people that just tell you what you want to hear, people that just thumbs up what you say, those are enemies. They just multiply kisses, but it never means anything. It's never going to help you grow as a person. And so better to be slapped with the truth than kissed with a lie. I want to leave you with this question: who receives an invitation from you to speak uncomfortable truths to you in a way that you'll listen to, in terms of helping you to be challenged, to change, and maybe even grow? Who are the people in your life that you have actually out loud given an invitation to and said to them, hey, I want you to hold me accountable. Hey, I want you to check my actions, or hey, I want you to check my words or my social media presence, the way I spend my money. I want you to speak truth into my life. Do you have those people? Do you have, and it might be a number of people that you've invited, in essence, to help you be a better human being? And you've said, hey, I value your voice. A slap from you, a wound from you feels like something that I know is going to come with love. It's going to come from someone who cares about me. Do you have those people that you've invited, and actually invited, not just assumed that it will happen, but said, hey, I want you to hold me accountable to these things. I want you to help me become a better person. I hope this has given you some stuff to think about. It's certainly kind of challenging me on how I relate to this idea of truth, this idea of stories that I believe, of where I get my news, and of the kind of spaces we create for helping people to be honest and real and authentic, and create spaces where we can grow together. This was Out of the Fishbowl. with BrettFish.